Learning to draw something like this croissant is a great way to learn how to draw. Okay, got croissant crumbs. So when you're learning to draw, people will quite rightly say it's useful to learn how to draw something like a box. And then if you're then going to draw, let's say, a toaster or something, you can turn this box into some sort of toaster and stuff like that. When you're drawing a person or something else more organic, it can be hard because it's a big leap to go from the box to the organic form. With an organic form, people will often talk about the importance of the gesture, and that will often be explained as like feeling the flow, right? And doing this sort of thing. And that's great and that's fine, but it's also really vague and really hard to do and very frustrating if you just try and do that. So just based on feeling alone. Okay, so here we have our form, and here we have our gesture, and it's all free flowing, and this is all like constructed from very simple primitive forms. Okay, the other option people will talk about is to observe the angles and distances. Almost thinking of this croissant now as a flat 2D shape, kind of thinking of it as a flat 2D shape, and I'm going to kind of carve it out, this 2D shape, from a big simple kind of envelope, and then I'm going to start to cut into it, right? And so I'm going to use my observational skills to build up this croissant. Now, overlapping with a lot of these and related to a lot of these is then the idea of value, so of light and dark. So one thing I can do is like close an eye and squint, and I can start to think about, the area of dark behind the croissant, and what are the kind of big, simple shapes of light and dark falling across this croissant, and I can simplify those. Okay, so I also have now value. So here are some skills that you want to be able to use all of these, in my opinion. Some people will just emphasize this and just say this is what it's all about. And some will really emphasize this. Just go, look, everything else is just nonsense. It's just whatever. They won't say that about value, but they'll kind of say it all starts from here, or it all starts from here, or it all starts from here. What I think is a great goal is to become kind of confident with the basics of these. And then regardless of the subject that you're tackling and what you want to do with it, you can bring out the thing that you want to bring out. So it's not so much that you always start here and then you build here and then you do this, It's more that you have all of these at your disposal. They all do different things for your picture. You can use different ones and at different amounts for different things. Most of the time you're going to use all of them though. Even for a landscape, there's a lot of gestural things happening and rhythms happening in a landscape. We're going to be using all of these a lot of the time. What you can do is do exercises which really focus on one of these, but it's really hard to do any of these without any understanding of the other one. Even if I want to go 90% observation, what do I observe? It's often informed by my understanding of the forms and my understanding of the values. So let's draw after all that. Let's draw this croissant. Okay, so this croissant, if we're thinking about it in terms of its form, in terms of its 3D form, it is, maybe cylindrical, right? But it's a cylinder that gets fattest in the middle and it's curved. So I'm probably not going to find it that useful to like start with just a straight cylinder and then cut this croissant out. I think it's a nice skill if you can to, you work on your simple, uniform, sort of straight cylinders and uniform boxes. But then over time, you start to learn to create like a curved cylinder, or a cylinder that starts off wider at one end and gets narrower at the other end. And you kind of make more organic feeling primitive shapes like that. And so for this one, this is the croissant here. What we could do is we could try to think about the overall curvature of it, right? So if we're going from one end, just along the bottom edge of the croissant, the overall curvature of it along the bottom and along the top, like that. We're thinking about its form. But you notice how what I'm kind of doing here, it's a little bit gestural, right? I'm thinking about the form. I'm trying to think about the form, but in order to make it curving like this, I need to kind of find that big flowing curve that cuts through all the noise, cuts through all the little bumps and stuff, and I find this big flowing curve. So even if I'm trying to build up the form of it, I'm thinking a little bit about the gesture of it, or the big flowing relationship through all of these points. One thing I want to do, if I'm going to make a form, it's really useful most of the time to figure out where's that center line. So, you know, when I have, could I have picked a flakier, more difficult thing to work with in terms of making a mess? All right, so I've got the halfway point here, right? Now, as I turn this in perspective, because I'm looking at this in perspective, that halfway point, it gets closer to the far end, okay? So it's much closer to the far end. So I don't want to put the halfway point, you know, in the middle of my shape here. It is more like over up here. And what I could do to make sure that I place that right is observe. So I could check the distance. All right, let me try and get this roughly in the same perspective here. I could try and check, you know, this is from your point of view, this distance, how many times does that fit into this distance, right? So how many times does the far side fit into the near side from in this perspective? And I'm going to say it's like twice, so it should be half. So like 1, let me do this properly. So have I got this right? 1, 2. Wait, let me do this right. 1, 2. So maybe I've got it a little bit too far up here, and I'm going to switch that center line, just bring it down a bit like that. Okay, so what did I just do? I'm trying to build up the form of this thing, but I've already used a little bit of gesture, and I've already used some observation. I've used some measurements here, right? Now, if I wanted to, let me just build this up a little bit more in terms of the form. So, you know, let's say we just try and wrap lines around this thing. It's kind of doing that. It looks to me like there is this very clear extra form going over the, you know, over the middle at the top here. And that form, you know, is right in the middle. So it's going to be around this center line. And it's going to do something like this. So it's kind of like an extra form on top of my curving cylinder, like that. And it kind of comes up, across and down like this. And then it kind of merges, right? This becomes kind of flattened here. Okay, so that's fine. I made a little bit of a mess, so let me sketch this out again. So this kind of comes over the top. It's like this extra form. Here's my center line for the whole croissant. And here is my curving, tapering, sort of, I don't know, semi-cylindrical shape. If I want to carve into this a bit more, then I notice that actually there's this kind of spiraling shape. And if we travel down the spiraling shape, it goes here and then down. And steps down like this, right, as we go around. So it's kind of like it goes like this and like this, and it steps down, right? And so what I have to do in order to kind of notice this is I have to see past all the little tiny details, the crumbs, the little crinkles and wrinkles, and find the bigger, simpler version of that form. And then I'm trying to just sketch that out, that simple stepping down and spiraling out. And I can get the little wrinkles and crinkles later on, but for now, I want to focus on the bigger, simpler forms, right? And what if I wanted to make more of a gesture drawing of this croissant, right? So I'm going to feel that big flow. I could go right through the heart of it. You know, that's the big, simple flow of the croissant, right? And I could go along the bottom of it and along the top of it, finding these big, simple flows again. There's also this spiraling out, you know, And I feel like that spiraling out, it really is a big part of the sort of movement and energy of this thing. Now, what's funny is that for some people, this is just like, oh, that's just really not how my brain works, you know? I just don't think about things in those terms. And then for other people, they're like, what are you talking about? Flow and whatnot, right? This is just so not concrete. At least this had clarity of center line, clarity of what it's actually representing. Whereas now I just don't know what you're talking about. You know, you're just talking about feelings. I think you're just making it up, you know, get these kinds of reactions. Okay. And you guys who hate this, you can rewire your brain to learn this, and you're really going to benefit. You know, I couldn't get my head around this at all. And learning it is a huge deal to be able to simplify the forms. And you'll notice that a lot of it is actually, you know, something that you end up feeling, rather than like, it's not like I set the vanishing points and I make a huge grid and I do some complex algebra and then I compute this. You know, it is something that you learn to feel, but it takes practice. And for those of you who hate this is also something that you can learn how to feel. And I'm sorry, it will add to your drawings and bring life. If you want to draw human beings, hey, they are alive and they have energy to them and they have flow to them. You know, there is a sort of aliveness that comes out of your lines when you start to think in these gestural terms. So let's not just close our minds to one or the other, and let's open our minds to both, you know. All right, if I really want to focus on the observational side of things, you know, I've had to use a lot of observations for these. You know, what is this curvature? Where does the curve start? Where does it end? Where is that center line? How far is it to this side, etc.? But what if I really, really just want to observe things? Well, maybe I could, you know, go, okay, well, if I kind of use a bunch of straight lines here, this one's going to overlap this one, so maybe I'll have it tuck behind a little bit. But, you know, I'm going to use a bunch of straight lines here to just go around the shape. And I'm going to try to use as few lines as I can for now. And then I might start to, you know, cut into this shape. Cut in, because I can get increasingly specific about my observations. Now, to do this properly, I should take a good amount of time. Maybe the gestural one I do without taking as much time and care, because I'm trying to get these big flowing marks and I'm trying to feel more than I'm analyzing. And this one kind of medium. This one I feel like, to do it well, more time than I have now, we really want to check these measurements and check these angles. And then only once we're happy with them do we move on to the next sort of stage of this, right? Now I'm going to use a little bit of this, you know, to understand which lines do I actually want to put in. You know, I want to put in the lines of the major forms and form changes. What I can also do is I can start to think about my values. So I could close an eye and I could squint and I could start to think about, okay, you know, where is it in dark and where is it in light? Now, if, let's say, I wanted to start to add values to this, you know, the way that I would think about it is I would remember the initial form down here was like this kind of banana shape, you know. Well, I would just add the dark, the shadow, as if it was that kind of banana shape. And then I might start to cut into and add to that based on this kind of stepping pattern that I've found in my forms. So rather than trying to go straight into all the details of the light and dark I see, I can try to make a simple version of the shadow and then complicate it. All right, so make the simple, just like with the form, I started with the very simple curved and tapered form. And then I kind of added the thing on the top and the step pattern and things like that. Similar with the gesture, I started with the big simple curves. Then I started to add the smaller ideas like this spiral pattern. So I started incredibly basic and simple and then complicate it once I'm happy with my simple version. So even on this cast shadow, you can see the real cast shadow on the back of this croissant. It kind of does this, it comes out and this, and it does this, because of the stepped pattern of the croissant, the cast shadow is a bit like that. But I just want to do the simple version first. So it's like a straight line. And I want to make sure that that straight line version of the shadow looks all right. And then I can come in and adjust that. I can go, actually, there's a little bit of a wave to that. So we have these different drawing skills. To me, none of them really work without the other ones. You might be able to suggest that you could just have observation, but then you kind of become a copying machine. If you have the power of using all of these, if you can simplify down and work from the big idea to the small idea, for each of these, you have superpowers when it comes to drawing, because you can emphasize the movement, the dynamism. If that's what the picture is about, you have a running person and you want to show that dynamism. I've got some random sketches here, and I'm trying to show this baseball player hitting a home run, and I'm trying to show that dynamism, So what I'm looking for here is, I'm looking for these big flows and things like that. I'm looking for energy in the marks and things, but look at how much form I'm having to use. Like simple cylindrical. To understand this arm, I really had to, to understand the waist here, I really have to understand the simple forms. To understand these folds, I really have to understand that. And a quick sketch of the, of the skateboarder, very simple. I'm trying to find this energy to this very simple sketch, but I'm having to use my form understanding. And to get the head to not look like a mutant relative to the legs, I have to use my proportion skills. So I didn't take loads of time over the measurements. I wanted to emphasize in my process the gestural stuff, and so it was a quicker sketch without measurement, because if I wanted it to look really realistic and accurate, I could have emphasized that. But instead, I used my kind of intuitive observation so that it looks reasonably in proportion, my intuitive sense of the forms, and a little bit of value, light and dark and stuff. But I was trying to bring out and emphasize that gesture. So sometimes I get emails like, which school of thought should I go for? Which is the right answer? And to me, it's kind of like a carpenter saying, should I get a drill or should I get a saw? You want to be able to use all of these tools. And then depending on what kind of furniture you're building, you will use different ones in different orders. All right, I hope that helps. Go buy yourself a croissant. I recommend drawing them from life and get two. So that's what I did. So you could eat one and not be hungry while you stare at the other one. If you want to learn how to draw and paint, especially with a focus on people, figures and portraits, come and check out our study group. It has grown into this unbelievable resource with personal feedback, loads of specialized reference sets, a complete catalog of courses to build your skills step by step. And it's really, really surprisingly affordable as well. So check it out. There's another video up on the screen. Check that out and enjoy your croissants.